What's the creepiest thing you've seen on the road at night? Story 1. This is my father's story, and he wasn't a long-haul trucker, but rather a 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s, and without a certain long-haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift. 11 to 7, I think. A guy comes in and just gives him the creeps. Seems sketchy. He was wearing tight jacket and pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer and was warm, so why is he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on substances. A lot of truck drivers use this station as it was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where they let truckers park and sleep or take a break. On this night at this time, it was just my dad, sketchy dude, and one trucker in there he kinda knew, as in, came in frequent enough to be conversational, and asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booths. They had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States in the 1970s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store. Dad did not have any protection or item of any kind. So the hours pass and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this truck driver guy in a car comes hauling fast into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB, nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. Calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, next closest station, to find the attendant harmed and unresponsive. No one else around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently, they eventually apprehend the guy in the blue car. My dad confirms it was sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charge him with serious offenses. To the long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks and hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently sketchy guy in blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation or something. He was in the system. Story 2. Myself and two friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge, Louisiana one night in my Ford van. It was about 2 a.m. There is a particularly long and dark section of highway just outside Laredo. No buildings, towns, or lights for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up on a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror. Can still remember seeing that the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to hitting this person. Story 3. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down the steep grade and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks, he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer, it jumped down, and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound, it leaped down and then leaped over to the other side of the embankment. At the time, he thought it was a Sasquatch. Now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain. Story 4. My dad has told me this story a couple times, and each time it always kind of weirds me out. He is not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night, him and a buddy went out to get food. About halfway into their drive down a dark road, My dad and his buddy noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his buddy found it odd because it did not seem safe and it was not that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea, and so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by, my dad and his friend both swear she had no face. Instead, there was just a black hole, as if she had been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly my dad floored it, and when they stopped to eat, both of them agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out, a woman had been killed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger told them the sightings of the woman were actually common. Story 5. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like, how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing did not seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerk thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60+ miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. Story 6. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He is the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I have seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and fear-stained pants. I will tell this story in the first person as he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I was not tired. I am on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there is someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy is taking the antlers as a trophy, or he is sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that this guy is eating the deer. He is pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. He in it stands up, and that is when I see that it is huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh no, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I am about to the point in the road he is standing at. I did not even think of stopping. In fact, I am starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I am passing it, it is looking at me. Again, not at the truck. It is looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there is a driver in here and knows where I am sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. Old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares me. Story 7. Maybe a bit off the mark, but it still scared the crap out of me. I was headed west on Interstate 76 here in Denver, just cruising along at about 70 miles per hour. Out of nowhere, I saw a massive, almost solid cloud of what looked to be dirt coming at me. I would say it was at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I scanned ahead of me but could not see any vehicle it could have come from. With nowhere to go, I slowed down and took the hit, hoping there was not anything big enough in there to come through the windshield or damage my truck, owner and operator. It was pretty loud as I smashed through it. The instant it hit, I knew it was not dirt though. I immediately hit the washers because I could not see a thing through all of the carnage. My windshield was painted with guts. Turns out it was bees, huge bees, that sounded like rocks when they hit. I cannot even imagine seeing that swarm if I was walking. They would harm anything in their path. Story 8. Not a trucker, but I have driven cross-country a few times. Have two freaky things that have happened. First, middle of the night with a buddy, and we pulled off to the side of the highway to take a piss and switch drivers. Nobody else around on the road. I walk to the side, pitch black, whip it out and start to pee. My buddy is just stretching his back or whatever. I heard something in the woods shake a tree. No other way to describe it, a tree about 30 feet away shook. Then I hear something big crashing through the woods coming straight for us in the car. My buddy and I do not even say anything. He dives in the driver's side, and I jump through the passenger window, pants still down. He floors it out of there. Legs and pants dangling outside. Never did see anything in the rearview mirror, but there was something out there coming at us. My buddy likes to say he heard me stop peeing when that tree shook. Second, I was solo somewhere in West Virginia, again middle of the night. I got off an exit, one of those long curvy ones. I saw lights before I got off and assumed it was exit stuff, or maybe even construction. Get to the exit and it is not construction, it is a ton of Army or National Guard guys. The exit was lit up brighter than daytime, so many lights set up pointing everywhere. The Army guys were completely decked out, gas masks on and rifles. They were sprinting around. One guy at the corner was frantically waving me through to get back on the highway. I gunned it out of there. Looked in the news later and did not see anything. No idea what was going on that night. Story 9, I was at a truck stop in Arizona. I was pulling through the fuel island, and right as I was about to leave, roughly 15 cop cars came flying into the parking lot with a SWAT van. They surrounded a truck that was already parked for the night. I heard later that the driver had lost a tire or something off his trailer, and it had harmed a guy on the side of the road. Do not know how true that story was, but it sounded possible. At the old Flying J in El Paso, I had pulled through the fuel island and was filling out logs and whatnot after filling up when someone started screaming help on the CB. It is not unusual to hear kids messing around or whatever, but this sounded like a full-grown man and did not sound fake. It only happens for about 15 to 20 seconds and then silence. Some people started asking the guy where he was but never got a response. Suddenly, another big rig in the parking lot starts to take off, right as a couple of cop cars pull into the truck parking area. The big rig takes out a smaller sign and then jumps a curb out into the service road for Interstate 10. Turns out a student got upset at his instructor and harmed him before leading the cops on a short, high-speed chase. Story 10. When I was a kid, I grew up in the cab of my father's truck. He was a single father, and I was on the road with him quite a bit. Occasionally, if he was going to pass near my grandmother's house, he would drop me off there for a week or so. I am sure to give himself a break from a very young son in a very tight space. One time when he was nearing my grandmother's house, I remember crying because I did not want him to drop me off. I loved my grandmother very much, but I was attached to my father for some reason. Separation anxiety, I am sure. Thanks, Mom. As I was sobbing, I started recognizing my surroundings and knew we were close. I decided the next song on the radio was going to be Dad's song, so every time I heard it, I would think of him. I guess that is why They Call It the Blues by Elton John came on the radio, so that chipper tune became the song I used to remember him. That was in the early 80s, and I cannot remember hearing that song over the last 20 plus years. 3 years ago, I was driving to see my dad in the hospital, and I stopped at a truck stop for gas and snacks. What song should start playing over the truck stop's speakers? But I guess that is why they call it the blues. I got a sick, nervous feeling. Was this a good omen or bad one? I am not superstitious, so I tried to dismiss it and chalked it up to chance. April 11 will be 3 years since I lost him. Surely it was just a random occurrence that I would hear that song going to see him for the last time, right? I am not superstitious or religious, but I sure would like to see the old man again someday. Story 11. My grandfather told me the story about how he was driving west to east along an empty stretch of road in southern South Dakota. He stopped at a stop sign at an intersection with nothing in sight, no buildings and no other vehicles. Then there was a bright light that hit him. He looked up and saw a bunch of blinking lights. Next thing he knew, he was at the counter of a diner about an hour down the road. It was about 6 hours later, and he had no idea what had happened. He asked the person at the diner when he came in, and the guy told him he came in about 10 minutes ago and just started drinking coffee without talking much. My grandpa told him what had happened, and the guy said something like, "Yep, that happens around here sometimes." Nothing weird ever happened to him again. He avoided that area for the rest of his life. He said he does not believe in aliens and does not know what happened, but I had a suspicion he thought he had been taken and just never accepted it. He told me never to tell this story to other people, but he died years ago and most of the people who knew him are dead, so I figured it was okay. Story 12. In 2003, when I was a senior in high school, or perhaps the summer after we graduated, a friend and I were coming home from somewhere I do not recall, and traveling down Murfreesboro Road in between Smyrna and the Borough, Tennessee. It was really dark and really foggy that night. Suddenly, a really strong feeling came over me to tell my friend to change lanes. As I opened my mouth to say something, she started changing lanes and told me she did not know why, but long story short, she had the same feeling. A few seconds later, just about the time we were going to shrug it off, a big boat of an old car came flying down the lane we were in at what had to be well over 100 miles per hour without a single light on, front or rear. It was moving so fast that it disappeared into the distance just as quickly as it had appeared. We pulled over, thanked our lucky stars, and headed back home with the high beams on for the rest of the drive home. Story 13. This is not my story, but an old friend of mine's. In the 90s, John was an information technology guy in parts of eastern Iowa and far west Illinois. He was used to driving from one account to another, either late at night or early in the morning. He would pick a halfway point to use a rest stop and to grab one of those awful paper cup coffees from the machines while he was there. One early morning, about 4:30 a.m., he was in Iowa, and he stopped at a wide spot in the road rest stop. He parked, and there were not any other people there, except for a couple of semis who looked like they had been there for quite a while. He went into the men's room, and it was deserted. He used the bathroom and went to the sink to wash his hands. He said he caught some movement from the corner of his eye, and there was a very tall, very thin man standing right in the middle of the entrance, about 15 feet away. He was dressed all in black, and he says that the guy's eyes were pitch black. The man was giggling to himself, and John swore he was at least 8 feet tall. He glanced down to grab a paper towel from the machine, and when he looks up, this man is so close he can hear him breathing with a loud bubbly sound. There is no way he could have crossed 15 feet in 1 second. As he told it, this thing, slowly smiled at him, and it was not a smile. It was a bearing of serrated, sharp teeth, and this thing starts chuckling like he is looking at a 3-piece KFC meal. My friend screams, "Jesus help me," and runs for his car. My friend says the thing is startled, like he was not supposed to be able to move. He felt like he should have been frozen, like staring at a snake. He runs to his car, which was not locked, slams the locks down, starts the car, and floors it getting out of there. As he is leaving, he looks in the rear view, and this thing is running after the car. He always swore somehow this thing followed him home. He was paralyzed in an accident not long after, and I went to care for him for a little while. I brought my 4-year-old son with me, and in his typical baby way, he would chatter away while the two of us were talking. I asked him one day who he was talking to. My son said he says his name is Biter. He has long teeth, and he lives with Mr. John. I grabbed my son and ran out of there. I never went back to that house. Story 14. So my dad and I were driving down 441 in South Florida. It was probably about 4 in the morning, and we had not seen another car for over an hour when we see this really bright orange light up ahead. As we get closer, we see that it is a fairly old-looking truck on the grass on the side of the road, and the hood is completely engulfed in flames. My dad pulls over, and as I was quite young at the time, he told me to stay inside, and he went to see if he could help the owners. I am sitting in the passenger seat watching intently as he approaches the car, but he cannot find anybody. Then, practically at the same time, we notice there is a woman in a torn, casual blue dress, standing over by the tree line, just kind of staring at my dad and breathing really heavily. My dad looks really nervous, but approaches her cautiously with his hands out before she turns and just bolts into the forest towards the farmland. He ran to the tree line to look for her, but she had completely disappeared. As we were driving away, it looked like the fire might have gone out, but we were not ever sure. Story 15. My father drove me at 4 a.m. to a city in Slovakia. We drove through woods, and the roads were pretty rough, so there was an 80 kilometers per hour speed limit. We had not seen any other cars for an hour or so, and suddenly we were blinded by a bright light. First, we thought that an irresponsible driver forgot to turn off his full beams, so my father honked a few times. As we drove on, we realized that the light was way too bright for a car, and my dad slowed down to 30 kilometers per hour. As we were like 30 meters away from it, we saw a huge thing, which was about 3 meters high. It was shaped like a human, but nobody is 3 meters high. The thing was covered in a white suit which was similar to a blanket. The bright light came out of this thing's head. It stood at the opposite side of the road, and it seemed like it was trying to get to our car. We were absolutely terrified, and my dad hit the gas, and we nearly hit this thing. We still do not know what it was. However, my dad thinks that it was an angel because he is very religious. I cannot explain what it could be. Story 16. I am not a trucker, but I am a territory manager, and my territory goes from New Mexico to Alabama and up to Kansas. So it is not uncommon for me to have to drive from Dallas, Texas to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then from Albuquerque to Montgomery, Alabama, and then back to Dallas all in 1 week. I have got a couple. I work for a premium off-road lighting company, so we work in the deserts at night a lot, usually with trophy truck and Ultra 4 race teams. Last year, I was coming home from King of the Hammers, and it was about 4:30 a.m., and I was on a state highway through the desert in southern New Mexico. If you have never driven it, you are basically as far away from anything out in the desert as you can possibly be. Impossibly straight one-lane highways that stretch for hundreds of miles. I was awake and alert even though it was so late, and I was totally alone on the road and had been for hours. Suddenly, without warning, while I was trucking along going about 80 miles per hour, the most insanely bright light came on right off my tailgate. It was so bright it lit up everything in the cab and was so blinding. I thought one of our race teams had snuck up behind me or something and turned on their light bars to mess with me. I drive a wrapped and branded distinct show truck, so it happens a lot. The light stayed on my back for a good 30 seconds and would stay right on my back even when I would swerve a bit or when I moved onto the shoulder a bit to see if they would pass. It was weird. It was like the light was bolted to the back of my truck or something. After about 30 seconds, I had enough, so I flipped on my rear-facing lights to give them a taste of their own medicine, and instantly the light behind me went off, and there was nothing whatsoever. Even though I was kind of blinded, I have some really powerful backup lights, and they came on the second the other light went out, so there is no way whatsoever another vehicle was behind me, and there was just wide open flat desert all around, so it is not like they could have pulled off and hidden, and I would have seen them anyway. Just nothing. I was totally freaked out, but I am not an easy scare and very comfortable with being in the desert alone at night. So I pulled over, grabbed my knife and my flashlight, and had a look around. I shone my flashlight all around and even used some of my portable hyperspots Again, I work for a lighting company and always carry around tons of demo lights to look all around me for anything, and there was nothing. No cars, no trucks, aircraft, unidentified objects, nothing at all except wide open, empty New Mexico desert. My truck was totally fine, but I know I was not just seeing things because the back of my truck was hot, like way hotter than normal. All the metal on the bedsides and tailgate was almost uncomfortable to the touch. I have never figured it out. The only logical possibility I can think of is I have read about ball lightning before, and apparently it is attracted to metal objects. Maybe I found some ball lightning and it stuck to the back of my truck. I have got more stories if anyone is interested. Story 17. Not a truck driver, and this falls under creepiest and not paranormal. A little after 9/11, about a year later, my ex and I, both black and both active duty, are traveling across America for an adventure to get to our next duty station instead of flying out. We were in the Midwest, I think near the Oklahoma and Arkansas border on Interstate 40. We were on a 2-lane and in the left lane about to pass a truck driver and then go back into the right lane. As we got about midway, the truck driver started driving into our lane. We slowed down, he went back over, we sped up, he crept over again. I was driving, by the way, he clearly did not want me to drive past him. I slowed down again and then sped up even faster. He completely cut us off, and I ended up driving 85 miles per hour in the dirt to avoid being hit by the driver. I almost lost control. I got back on the road and I continued to speed until I could not see him in my rearview mirror. That night we went to a hotel to check in. The clerk was acting funny, people were staring at us. We did not feel comfortable at all. Even when the clerk asked what brought us here, we were like, oh yeah, just some active duty military here, going to our next duty station and wanted to drive across America. We went straight to our room and did not come out until checkout. The next day we went back to our car and there was a bullet hole in our bumper. My car at the time was brand new, as in, a few days before I had just driven it off the lot, and I was proud of my car, so I did the 365 checks a lot, like the rental car company does. And my car was pristine the day before when we were in New Mexico. So not only were we almost driven off the road and nearly harmed, we were shot at some point. Story 18. One morning I got in my car about to head to work. I had a sense of a small boy sitting in the middle of my back seat. I could not recognize who it was, age, era, etc., and I could not physically see or hear this entity. It was just a feeling of a presence. It said nothing and stayed there for only about a minute. I had an overwhelming urge to tighten down my seatbelt super tight as I could possibly get it in order to feel snug and secure. I have never done this before or since this one time. It is not a normal behavior, and I felt like I had to do it. On my way to work, someone did not stop before crossing the highway. I T-boned the person at 65 miles per hour, spun, and ended up in the center median. I walked away with just a bit tongue. Story 2. I was at a friend's house and we ordered a pizza. My friend and I hopped in his car and we drove to pick up the pizza. When we drove across Broadway, 2-lane each way, light, turn lanes, etc., I felt this overwhelming darkness looming in the area of the intersection. It did not feel like before. No kid in the back seat, just a darkness looming over the area. I could not tell how soon something bad was going to happen. Minutes, hours, days, weeks, etc. No idea. It is also not a feeling I have had before or since. We drive across Broadway on our way to the pizza place about a mile down the road. I kind of felt like writing it down on a piece of paper. There is going to be an accident here. But it felt kind of foolish having no sense of the feeling in terms of context or time. We picked up the pizza and drove back. On our way through the intersection, a lady stopped at the light, took off, and drove right in front of us. We hit her car and came to a stop in the intersection. Now here's the odd part. The lady was stopped in the turn lane waiting to go the same direction we were. She took off on red on active cross traffic, was not solely us crossing, but cars decently spread out, intermittent. She also drove straight rather than taking her planned turn. I even asked the lady why she went, and she said she had no idea why she went. It was not even an intentional act for her. All right, that is all I got. These both happened long ago in my youth, 16 to 18. I am about 40 now. These things are not any kind of normal occurrence, gift, or sight. They were very unique instances, alone in their own space, no repeats, no similarities, and kind of sadly nothing new. But then again, I guess I would need to have another accident to have it. Story 19. I might be a little too late for anyone to see this, but about my third year into my career, I was taking a load of paper from Alabama to Ohio. Well, the paper mill I loaded at was in the middle of nowhere and was probably 65 miles away from the nearest interstate. I was a little low on my legal driving hours, so I figured I would spend the night at the shipper. Well, the shipper does not allow overnight parking. Great. So I get loaded and roll out. I set my GPS for the nearest truck stop, which was 70 miles. There was one closer, but it did not have showers according to Google reviews. So I am rolling along this winding country road, just taking my time because it is dark. I flip my high beams on when I get to a straight section of the road, and I can see a figure walking. I remember thinking how brave they must be. Well, as I get closer, I notice the figure is a man in an all-white suit. As my lights uncovered more of him, I noticed he had a bag slung over his shoulder. Not a big one, but big enough to notice. As I started to ease the truck over to the left side of the road to pass him, he turned and stuck his thumb out as if to hitch a ride. Now I normally would not have a problem with that, except the fact that when he turned towards the truck, the place where his face was supposed to be was completely red and blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Blank, red and blank. I must have hit my door lock button about 30 times. I made it to the truck stop and waited until daylight to take my shower. I do not know what I saw that night, but whatever it was, it cannot ride with me. Story 20. A few months back, I was taking a race hauler back east from California. I was on Interstate 10 in New Mexico. I got tired and decided to stop on an off-ramp. In parts of New Mexico, there are off-ramps that are literally nothing more than an off and on ramp. No roads to take when you exit, they typically have wide shoulders, and I did not consider it an unsafe place to stop. When I took the exit, there was a small travel trailer pulled over, and it appeared the driver was getting some sleep, so I felt better not really being the only one in the middle of nowhere. I slept for 3 or 4 hours and woke up. It was still very dark out and cold. I looked in my mirror and noticed the camper was gone. I do not remember how long I sat there. Maybe a few minutes, and then looked in my mirror again and noticed a vehicle very close to the rear of my trailer, no lights on. Honestly, I saw the silhouette and thought it was a cop. Did not think much of it. Figured he was taking a break, or maybe even running my plates, as the rig I had was expensive and quite commonly stolen. A few more minutes passed and I saw the headlights flash. Unsure of what was happening, I turned on the truck and prepared to get the hell out of there. The headlights flashed quickly 2 more times, and then I heard a door slam. An older Chevy Silverado took off past me and crossed over the highway and headed west on 10. I waited about 5 minutes, and after turning on all the exterior lights, I walked around the truck. The best I can tell, they were planning to siphon diesel out of my tanks. The cap was off the right side tank, and also the side entry door had pry marks near the latch. Still freaks me out a bit, and I am more careful of where I stop these days. Story 21. Not a long-haul trucker, but once a newspaper delivery person in rural Georgia. I usually drove my route between 2 to 4 a.m. down all sorts of dirt roads, rally cross, style flinging papers along the way. It was mostly fun, and I had some neat interactions with rabbits sometimes racing me on the road and near missing owls. However, I was always at least partly creeped out for the entire ride with the completely unrealistic and supernatural fear that I was never really driving alone. Always afraid that at some point, something from the back seat would come out of the darkness and whisper in my ear. Anyways, getting to the most notable creepy part, I only ever saw people 3 times on my route. Once when I drove up on a wreck, another when someone ran me off the road, and a third. There was one road I always drove down the fastest because it was the creepiest. No lights, no houses. Just long fences down a perfectly straight road that was hypnotically long. The only interruption in the scene that my headlights could shine light on along the way was an old-style barn with hay loft and second-story door for the loft. I never wanted to look at it, but ended up glancing at it every night as I drove by. Always the same. Tall, creepy, old, leaning, door locked, moving shadows. Gone. One night as I was approaching, I noticed the door swinging out, open. Of course, I had to look this time. As I drove past, I glimpsed a pale person in a nightgown standing in the doorway. I actually slammed on brakes and reversed, wondering if what I saw was real. The person or apparition was gone, and I never saw the door open again for as long as I drove the route. Story 22. We pulled into a gas station, and when we got out for snacks, bathroom, etc., everything felt surreal. Like as soon as we got out of the car, we did not hear anything. No people, no cars, nothing. It was dead silent. We went inside and looked around for a bit before choosing some snacks. My sister went out for the bathroom, and when she came back, she tugged on my brother's jacket and said, "We have to go." My brother, obviously confused, "What? Hold on, I need to pay." And then my sister just pulls him away, causing him to drop everything. He kind of got mad and pulled away, but when he turned around, she was out the door and sprinting towards the car. Me and my brother looked confused at each other. We agreed I would follow her and see if she was okay. From what she told me, she was definitely not. We have both seen some weird things before and are both understandably very wary of things around us. She told me that when going to the bathroom, she heard loud scratching footsteps, like someone was dragging their feet with boots on. She ran into the bathroom, locked the door, and did her business. As she was about to open the door, she felt scared all of a sudden, and instead of opening it, she put her ear on the door and listened. There it was again, the dragging feet, and this time some huffing. She stayed in the bathroom until it stopped. She slightly opened the door, and seeing nothing, she bolted to the storefront and tried dragging us out. I decided I would help calm her down by bringing her to the bathroom and showing her no one was there. We got out the car, and I noticed my brother was paying, so we made it quick. We walked over near the bathrooms, and I looked around. When I looked around the side of the building, I saw a small switchblade knife just on the dirt. It was opened, and I could see the blade. It was shiny enough that I could clearly see it because of the back door light. I have never backpedaled so hard. We ran back to the car, my brother in tow. I did not tell her what I saw until a few days later. When she asked again, I was scared I would freak her out, so I did not say anything immediately. Scariest thing that has happened to me and my sister up to date. We have had freaky things, but I think that was the first time it might have been a real person. Story 23. Not a long-haul trucker, but did a 3-month road trip after my dad and an uncle all died in the same month to clear my head. I just got in my car and drove. Never had a destination or anything. I could have stuck to highways, but I like taking back roads. There was an old Navajo road that cut down through tribal grounds, did not add too much time, and I had enough gas, so figured why not. The night before, I saw tons of meteors in Utah and was looking forward to a dark road where it is just me and the stars. Kind of joked to a friend back home I was about to hit skinwalker country. Was driving on this narrow road for an hour or so. One side was a cliff wall, and the other side was a steep drop-off. I see a car way off in the distance, headed my same direction. As I get closer, it starts slowing down. I am going 65 plus miles per hour, and by the time I get to it, it is crawling along at 25 miles per hour. I am kind of riding its back for a few minutes. The road was a little too dark and windy for me to feel comfortable passing on the left, plus their driving was a little erratic, and I was afraid of the drop-off. Suddenly they slam on their brakes, and then their lights turn off. There was no phone service out there, and nobody else around, so my immediate thought is, these guys are trying to get me to rear-end them, or they are trying to make me crash and then rob or assault me. I could tell there were 3 or 4 guys in the car, and I was by myself. Who knows, but either way, it was not good. After their lights turned off, it was so dark I could not see their car whatsoever. I start crawling forward, ready to get attacked or crash into them, but never saw them again. There was nowhere this car could have turned off or turned into. It had to be on my same road. They were gone, though. Did not see them at all. For the rest of this Navajo road, I had it floored, was going 80 miles per hour and could not wait to get to phone service or somewhere a little more well-lit. They were driving an older car, and I am sure it could not have gone faster than I was headed. Never saw them again for the entire 1.5-hour stretch of road. I still have no idea how their car just disappeared. Story 24, I was living in upstate New York several summers ago when there was a pretty intense solar flare, and the aurora borealis was expected to be visible in Vermont and New Hampshire. I could not get anyone interested enough to go with me, so I ended up taking a pretty far drive by myself in hopes I would get to see it. I was working at a restaurant at the time, so I did not leave until 7 p.m. or so I did not have much daylight left. I stupidly just kept driving and eventually had the realization that I was a couple hours from home, by myself, in and out of reception, and I was starting to get really tired. I turned around to head home and was getting so tired that shadows started to seem like they were jumping out at me. Crappy reception made it difficult to follow my phone's directions, so I was having to backtrack with some frequency. Somehow I end up on this dirt road with cornfields on either side, and I became overwhelmed with anxiety. I ended up coming to a point where there were cornfields on just one side and a couple distant houses on the other side. At this point, I decide that this cannot possibly be the right way, and I start to do a K-turn. I had been blaring music in my car to try to stay awake, so as I am doing this K-turn, I sense something over the sound of the music, and I get incredibly anxious. I turn down the volume right as I turn to look around. At the same moment, I see a very angry dog barking and lunging at my window. I put the car into gear and hauled myself out of there while the dog chased me for a few hundred feet. The adrenaline kept me awake for most of the remaining drive, and I never lost that sense of doom until I pulled into my driveway. I was so bothered by it all that I had this desire to never leave my house again. Luckily, that wore off in the next couple days. After reading a few stories about truckers seeing dogs as a precursor to falling asleep at the wheel and getting into an accident, it makes me wonder about the dog's significance that night. Story 25, about 14 years ago, 4 friends and I decided to drive out to Weatherford, Texas, to look at some new Hondas at a dealership after they had closed because we were stupid high school kids and apparently did not understand the concept of trespassing. The ringleader of our group of friends drove us in his 1996 Honda Civic. We took 730 south toward 180. Around 20 minutes into the drive, with no lights, houses, or other vehicles in sight, his CD player turned off mid-song. No one touched it, and he did not have controls on his steering wheel. We all thought it was weird, but nothing supernatural. He turned it back on, and we completed the drive. After looking at the cars, the dealership was basically off the highway. We left to head back to our hometown. We ended up taking the reverse route back, this time north up 730. We started joking about the possibility of aliens, and what if that was what caused the CD player to turn off. About 2 minutes later, and around the same spot as before, it happened again. This time it went from music to static. At the same time, again, I am not making this up, a black human-shaped figure materialized out of one of the bushes by the highway and walked into the road in front of our car. I remember the light from our headlights illuminating the space around the figure, but not the figure itself, like it was absorbing the light. There was no shadow that I could see. This was not a guy in a bodysuit. It was like looking at a two-dimensional cartoon of the darkest color you can imagine, and it was reaching its arm out to us. We were going about 55 to 60 miles per hour, and we had to swerve to avoid it. I remember as we passed it that it had no distinguishing features, no face, no fingers, no clothing, no shape, like a nose protrusion or chin, other than a dark void. We all screamed at the top of our lungs. We almost completely went off the road. After our driver regained control, we sped off as fast as his car could go, carrying 5 people. We had to calm him down so we would not wreck. We were all freaking out, asking each other what the other saw to verify that it was not a hallucination. We all saw it. We all had the same experience. When we got back to our town, we were all kind of just in shock and did not know what to say or how to explain it to anyone, or even if we should. There were no reports of any similar encounters on the news, nor were there any reports of a body turning up in the area, or a homeless guy bothering people, or really anything. I had forgotten about that incident for many years until a few months ago, when I was hanging out with one of my friends who was there. I asked him if he remembered that night. He does. Still no idea what it was. Story 26. This is not supernatural. I am not a trucker, but my father was. I became a diesel mechanic, kind of following his footsteps. When I was about 6 years old, my father picked me up to go do a haul of some chemicals down to a specific plant in New York. We picked up the load and headed out, but took a different route than usual. We passed our usual right-hand turn and proceeded a few more miles up the road. We came to an intersection that is a Y in reverse, and we were to take a right-hand turn. There was a restaurant across from us on the left as we turned the right and pulled over. My father told me to get out and kick the tires and take care of business, which meant to take a leak. So after doing my business between the dual wheels, I kicked the tires to check for flats as usual. As I turned around to my right to the front of the truck, my father was pulling something large out of the cab of the truck. It looked heavy and it was long. I asked him what it was and he said, "It is just trash. Mind your business and get in the truck," he said. I hopped in the cab and half watched my old man as he hauled this thing into the cornfield. He got back in the truck and we took off, and that was it. In 1991, I heard about the body of the young girl that was found right there in that area that dated back to around the same time me and my old man used to run together. All these years, I cannot help but wonder if that was what my old man pulled out of the cab of that truck. It has been 20 plus years now, and it still haunts me. Story 27, I got lost in Pennsylvania one night and tried to turn around. The road I was on did not have any roads I could turn onto. The places where I could fit were closed and gated off. The road ahead had a no truck sign, so I stopped on the shoulder enough that the other traffic could fit through. I tried asking my co-driver for help, and she told me I would have to do it alone. I hated her. She was no help, and I had to do everything. So I am looking for a place to turn around. GPS and phone cannot find any signal. When up in front of me, truck lights flickered on. I was pretty sure there was not a truck there a second ago. Then an Asian man walked up to me from the truck and asked if I was lost, to which I said yes. He told me he had the key to a school bus yard behind his truck and had me turn in to get turned around. It was full of old buses and was not on Google Maps, even in satellite mode. I am sitting behind his truck when he asked where I was headed. I told him, and he knew where my load was coming from: California. I was headed to a Walmart distribution center, and we were late, so I thought maybe he worked there and knew because we were the only late load, but he did not have a Walmart truck or trailer. I shrug it off, and he says to follow him there, and everything fine for a while. Gets me up and on to Interstate 81, and we take off up this hill. He takes off, and I can see his neon orange trailer up ahead cresting the hill. I get up to the top, and he is gone. It is a straight rise ahead, and I do not see him anywhere. So I start freaking out. No way he sped off that fast in a semi, and I cannot find the exit I need. I see a Flying J, truck stop if you do not know, and stop. I run inside to get something to eat, donuts and a Gatorade, and I go to the counter. There is a trucker's atlas sitting there as I am checking out. I decide I need it since I am lost. He rings up the donuts, rings up the drink, gets the atlas, and it does not scan. Cashier tries again. Same cancel sounds as before. He hands it to me and says, "Another trucker must have left it here. I do not even think we stuck it, to be honest. Just take it." I get back in the truck and scarf down my donuts and crack the atlas open. I find where I am and plot the rest of my trip. My GPS flickered back to life when I started the engine. I do not believe in ghosts and stuff, but that really made me wonder. Story 28. My dad was a trucker for a few years in the 80s before becoming a firefighter. There is a very small town in Oklahoma called Fairfax that he frequently traveled to carrying oil field supplies. The highway to the town is a paved 2-lane highway that cuts through the open wheat fields of Pawnee and Osage counties. Very quiet. He was traveling around midnight one night north on Highway 18 en route to Fairfax when he said he rounded a curve and his headlights illuminated a man in a wheelchair, pushing himself down the middle of the road. Dad said it was extremely foggy, and had he been distracted at all, he likely never would have seen the man and run over him. He swerved into the opposite lane, narrowly missing the man. Once he felt he passed him, he pulled over and looked for the man to offer help but never saw him. Dad continued to Fairfax and joined another trucker at a stop. He said the trucker had been a few miles ahead of him on the highway and was wide-eyed in shock. Dad asked him if he saw the same thing, to which the trucker said, "I thought I had seen a ghost." Dad said they contacted a deputy in the area who told them it was a common sighting for truckers. He had no further explanations about who the man was or why he would be going down the highway at night. He told them he would always go check, but never located the man. Story 29. My story is not quite what the title asks, But in late 2002, I was riding along with an uncle of mine. I am from Texas and spent a few months with a truck driving uncle of mine out of Missouri. I rode with him, carrying a load to Maryland. After a few days or so, we ended up parking near a rest area in Myersville, Maryland. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I remember having the fear of my life. I was asleep in the passenger seat when I was awakened by a very loud sound. As I awoke, I looked behind me toward my uncle, who was just waking as well. Just as I was about to speak, bright lights shined in through all the windows. I remember getting an adrenaline rush and reaching for my seatbelt when I heard people screaming not to move from outside the truck. I froze and saw people in black gear and guns saying to leave the truck now. All I remember just after was the truck shaking as SWAT pulled us from the truck and pulled us across the street in darkness while not saying anything. Most shocked and afraid I have ever been. Once we were near what looked like a bus bench, we heard a loud bang. Also, there was a helicopter nearby, which was the sound we heard. Could not see where because it had no lights on. Long story short, we were sleeping near the Myersville, Maryland rest area where the DC snipers were sleeping. We were interviewed by a guy from the FBI when the sun came up. We were told the person that was the man shooting people on the Beltway was the suspect they arrested in the rest area. They did not go into detail but interviewed everyone there. I remember the blue car they drove being put in a trailer. We did not get to leave until 1 p.m. that day. I also remember a Greyhound type of bus being there. It was full of Orthodox Jews being interviewed as well. Actually got talked to by a news crew as well. Story 30. My dad was not a long-haul truck driver, but he told us a story of when he picked up a hitchhiker on his way back home from Texas A&M back in the 60s. He said he was confused why anyone would be hitchhiking in the middle of the barren Texas countryside. He could tell the guy was a bit sketchy and nervous, so he made him sit beside him instead of behind him. A little further down the road, he noticed the guy had a pistol on him, which was not really odd, but did make him feel more uneasy about the situation. They ended up passing a state trooper, then the guy got super fidgety, so my dad made the call that something was up with this guy. He told the guy he needed to use the restroom and call his girlfriend, so they stopped at a gas station where my dad called the police and stayed in the bathroom until they got there. It turns out the guy had robbed several banks in the prior towns and used hitchhiking as a method of fleeing the scene. So yes, my dad's intuition was right, and he got a pat on the back from the cops and never stopped to pick up another hitchhiker again. Story 31. Not a trucker. Not paranormal. Definitely unsettling. I was a server in the Valley. Was the day before Halloween. Had requested Halloween off. Originally told no. Manager gives the okay sometime around 11 p.m. the night before. Decide, forget it. I am keeping my plans and drive to Santa Cruz, California after shift. Arrive at friend's place. Did not sleep longer than an hour or two. Drove friends to Berkeley to see live action Rocky Horror Picture Show. Super fun. Later, still on Halloween night, I am driving friends back to Santa Cruz. Been awake for longer than I have ever been up before. That drive back to Santa Cruz is still the scariest thing I have ever done. No aliens, ghosts, or nefarious folk. Just my sleep-deprived, addled brain. The first hour or so was fine. After that, I started to see multiple overpasses that were not actually there. Animals near or in the road, not there when I came up on where they should have been. Obstructions in my lane of travel, also absent when I drove into where it would have been. I spent the majority of the drive seeing things that I logically should avoid, but also logically knowing they were not actually there. I just keep checking on my friends, who were all blissfully passed out, while silently chanting to myself, I will get all of you home alive and safe. I will get all of you home alive and safe. Over and over. I got them all home alive and safe. I will never drive anywhere while that sleep deprived ever again. Story 32. This might get buried, but this story always creeps me out. My dad's friends, they were not really long-haul truckers, but they were thieves and had just robbed a safe from somewhere in the United Kingdom. This must have been back in the 70s or 80s. They were using a van to carry the safe, and it was around 3 in the morning when they decided to stop somewhere and have a rest and a cigarette. Anyway, as they were parked up on a quiet main road, they could hear the clip-clop of a woman's high heels. They thought it was odd, seeing as it was early hours of the morning with no one else around. The sound stood out. What would a woman be doing out here at this hour on her own? They looked in the wing mirror, and sure enough, they saw what appeared to be a woman walking towards the van. They looked at each other puzzled and waited for her to approach the window, which was already rolled down. My dad's friend would be deeply uncomfortable by this point in telling the story. As she approached and they looked at the woman, they said they were sure it was actually the devil. It was a being with a razor-sharp smile from ear to ear and the most evil look in the eyes. My dad's friend yelled to the one driving, "Freaking drive," and they just sped off. They said in hindsight they were not sure if it was heels they heard or hooves. My dad's friends were not ones for making up stories either, and this was one of the only experiences they had like this, and they swore it was real. Story 33. Once my friend and I were heading from Venice to Punta Gorda in my old Dodge minivan. Simple enough drive, but it goes through a part of Central Florida which is almost completely empty, because forget it. Late night road trip to deliver a quarter-pound and fewer cops. We drove on these non-line roads, and when we came to where we were supposed to meet with a buddy of mine, that road had a police roadblock in the middle of nowhere. Forget it, definitely cannot go that way. So we detour around some roads in an attempt to get there another way. Big mistake, as we were running low on gas. I swear we were below empty the entire time. The road we took to get away from the cops ended up being around. You have to drive about 70 miles to even get to the next street. I should also mention these roads are absolutely straight for the most part, and we have not seen another car besides the cops for an hour. No giant turns, and if anything, there were just spots of woodland that gave into giant open fields that extended for miles in all directions. As we are coming around this small bend out of a woodland area into a field, we see a big rig traveling normal speed, and we are going to catch up to him, I realize. We are probably about a mile behind him, but we can still see the headlights and everything. As we go around another slight bend in the field, we lose sight of him until we come up to the straightaway. Except that when we got to the straightaway, there was no trucker. There was no truck anywhere to be seen. This is not a type of place where you can just pull off the side behind some trees and be lost to an observer. There were no trees or anything to hide a giant big rig. It was an open field, and this giant truck absolutely vanished without a trace. There was no possible explanation, and both my friend and I were super spooked and made haste to get out of there. Finally, somehow, made it to Lafayette, and there was a gas station open, thank goodness. Filled up, got out of there, and delivered our bag with much sketchiness. But if you are ever driving out in Punta Gorda at 2 in the morning, do not. Story 34. Not a trucker, but when I was about 10 to 11 years old, 44 now, my folks and I were driving from southeast Michigan to southern Indiana, Madison, to see my grandparents. We had left early afternoon and were taking rural roads the last bit of the way instead of the highway. My dad was driving and was from down there, so he knew the roads really well. Mom was in the passenger seat and I was in back. It was probably after 8 p.m. and pitch dark except the stars. Mom and I were trying to pick out constellations. My mom noticed something in the sky and asked my dad about it. He had been a private pilot most of my life at that point. My dad started to slow down a bit and was looking out her window while glancing back at the road now and then. There were not any other cars on the road, and it was all farmland, so there was little chance of hitting anything. With her throwing ideas out of what it could be, and my dad dismissing them, I finally was able to pick it out. It was just a small, horizontal row of lights that looked like they were going around something. Everything is bigger when you are a kid, but I would estimate it was a few hundred yards off the road into the field, about 100 feet off the ground, keeping pace with the car. My dad got more curious as they were talking about what kind of aircraft it could have been. He started slowing down even more to about 20 to 30 miles per hour. The thing was still there, keeping pace. My dad wanted to see if it was making any noise, so he stopped the car. When they opened the doors to get out, the thing shot off away from the car, further into the field and gone. It did not go up, just shot off at the same height. I do not remember hearing anything but my folks' comments. My dad said, "Well, huh?" And my mom just kept wondering what it had been. We all talked about it for a little bit as we drove the rest of the way in. We told my grandparents about it, but they were not very interested. My folks and I talked about it every now and then over the years, just to make sure none of us had imagined it, but we never settled on what it was.